Hello everyone, welcome to the class today again. So in the last video, we have talked about the questions which are quite generic in nature in terms of tell me about yourself, your current roles and responsibilities, how much do you know about ServiceNow at the platform level, uh, how does it help customers and enterprises, what are the different modules you've worked in ServiceNow, are you CS certified, are you ITOM certified? We discussed all those questions. They are quite generic in nature and which can be easily answered even by looking at the candidate's profile and resume, except the first one and the fourth one. Yeah. So now we'll go a little deeper today in terms of asking those techno-functional questions, which a system administrator is supposed to answer, right? Now, in this particular case, what I've done is I have kind of bifurcated them into two different categories. One is the basic level of questions, which that person who is applying for a job interview must know, and some advanced level questions, which if they know good enough, I mean, that you can put them on higher pedestal in terms of opportunities, or if they don't know, then also it is fine, as long as they know the basics around those things, right? So let's talk about the basic set of questions first. Which ServiceNow versions you have worked on or currently working? So this is again, can be a question which can be put even in generic category, but yeah, fair enough. We can take it in the basic category also. So for example, right now, ServiceNow is in San Diego release. You might have worked on previous versions like Rome, like Quebec, like Paris, and even the older ones. So if you have more experience in ServiceNow world, you might have worked on previous versions as well, apart from even Paris. You might have worked on London, New York, all of those, right? And then the next part is which version you're currently working on. So here, the expectation is that you should have worked at least on N-1, if not N. When I say N, I'm talking about the latest release, which is in the market right now. For example, if I talk to today's world, which is April 2022, in San Diego is the latest version, which we can term as N, and N-1 would be Rome. So they'll expect you to work on Rome at least. But if not, so to be honest, version is not a very big thing because generally the platform level features do not significantly change or do not significantly transform the way they work in the backend. They are, however, releasing a lot of new enhancements in the latest versions. But still, it is all right if you have not worked on N or N-1. But N working less than N-2 will definitely be looked at as a disadvantage, because by the time you have 3 or 4 releases older, there are a lot of transformations which would have happened. People understand that you might have not migrated to the N or N-1 version because of some complexities in your organization. But if you're still on the very, very old versions, then definitely there is a problem somewhere, which they would like to explore more. That is why this question is being asked. The second one, if I see any key differences between the latest version and the version before that, which are relevant to you in your day-to-day activities. Now, for example, if I talk about ServiceNow System Administrator, right? So as a part of the whole product, they have so many products under their umbrella, if you know, they will have a lot of changes for every single product. You cannot read them, you cannot study them all together because it is too huge exercise to do, to be honest. And especially for a ServiceNow System Administrator, he is not looking at all those products generally, right? So he or she generally looks for those things in the latest version which have been changed for that particular role. For example, whoever is doing system admin role, he will be more interested in those activities, in those functions which have been enhanced in the latest version, not what has been changed in ITSM or what has been changed in ITOM or HRSD. That would not be so significant for them. However, the whole reason is that you should be staying updated with the latest versions of the market and what has changed for you as a system administrator. For example, in San Diego, if you have seen my previous videos where I was just giving some hint, I have not covered it in detail, but I gave you some hints in terms of user experience, the next experience, they call it as, right? The workspaces, the overall look and feel of the homepage. So those are very key differences which anybody would observe by default if they have worked on the latest version. If they've not worked, fair enough, you can still understand that, but still people expect you in an interview that you know at least basics, what has changed at a high level in the latest version. You may not know all the nitty-gritties, which is fine, but at least the basics, right? The top 3 out of 5 things kind of stuff, which you should know what has changed as a part of system administration, which is now platform capabilities, now platform administration, now platform user interface, all those things I'm talking about. I'm not talking about something which is quite exclusive to a product. All right, so let's talk about the next question, which is, what do you mean by foundation data in ServiceNow? Now, this foundation data thing is quite interesting, right? So for every product, it generally differs from product to product. For example, you might need very basic level of foundation data for IT service management, whereas you might need a lot of foundation data in customer service management. But still, even at that level, if I talk at a generic level, that what are those things which are required? So for example, you will need users, right? You will need groups under which those users are assigned. You will need locations. You will need basic Cmdb, right? I mean, it's your servers, databases. So that those are the kind of foundation data which you can have in system. When you talk about, for example, customer service management, may not be relevant, but then just a very high level understanding that if you want to onboard somebody onto customer service management, you might need a lot of things. For example, you might need customers, you might need customer contacts, you might need the service entitlements, you might need the products, you might need install basis items, you might need sold products, you might need assets. So there are a lot of stuff which you would need, especially in the case of CSM. But yeah, in case of ITSM, the basic things are enough. Yeah, so Cmdb I said because you'll need it for the entire incident problem change structure. You will need users and groups definitely to assign those tickets to. You will need locations in terms of impacted locations, right? Any kind of logic you apply that for this location, assign this ticket to this particular team, something of that sort, right? You might need severity, priority metrics, for example. That could be one of the things, but then it is not termed as a foundation data as such. It is a specific requirement for incident management per se, not for foundation data as such. So foundation data generally includes these basic things like departments, users, roles, groups, locations, all that stuff. And that is all the foundation data we talk about. Now, for example, notifications and all those things, they're not foundation data, but they are basic capabilities of ServiceNow on our platform, right? We have talked about it, workflows, flow designers, approvals, notifications, right? All those things are also required to be configured. But again, we don't term that as foundation data, but it is, yeah, some kind of basic things which are required in ServiceNow. Now, what all can you do using a service portal? So we have seen the service portal already, right? There are a lot of things in service portal which we can do. Talking about service portal, right? So the question was, what all do you need for service portal? What all do you do in service portal, right? So you can see it from the interface also, right? You can search knowledge bases. You can request catalogs. You can see the status of your request. You can see system status. You can add multiple items to cart. You have a search bar. How can we help? You have a lot of things like, all these menus which you have in the top, you also have it here, like request something. You have knowledge base, you have get help. You have out of the box, you have a lot of widgets also, which talks about top rated articles, my open incidents, my open tickets, announcements. You can configure these widgets as per your requirement, as per a business need, right? So there are a lot of things that you can do on a service portal. So let's talk about the next one. So these questions we see, right, they are not very what type of question. They are kind of the questions which you can answer only if you have understood the concepts in ServiceNow. That is why I kind of noted down them in a very specific way, so that if you are able to answer these questions, which means you understand the basics of ServiceNow, you understand the basics of system administration, you can actually do basic configurations in system. Now, the next question number 5 says, what are the benefits of using Cmdb? Now, Cmdb is configuration management database. You already know that. When I say what are the benefits, which means the question can be framed like, why do we use Cmdb in the first place, right? So that's a very basic question. So, of course, you might have seen how does it look like, which is fine, but then why do we use it is the first question, right? And if you remember, we have answered these questions almost in every class we have taken, because whenever we talked about a particular thing, we always talked about the why part of that thing. When we were talking about Cmdb, we said clearly that because you have a configuration management database which has all the underlying infra components required for a service, you can find out the impact analysis. If you have tagged it with asset management, you can also track the financials around it. You understand that how a service is being delivered end to end. So for example, if there is a problem in a router, which is connected to a switch, which is connected to a server, for example, the server will also go down, and the server will go down, any database on that server will also go down. Any application which is depending on that database will also go down. So the real benefit of using Cmdb is to do impact analysis, to proactively analyze where would things go wrong if there is a problem at that level. So if you're clear about those upstream and downstream relationships in terms of the entire infra components, you will be able to utilize Cmdb to its maximum. And believe me, Cmdb is one of the very trickiest parts in implementing ServiceNow. Some people have done it quite well. Some people are still struggling with it. So you need to really consider a lot of stuff while implementing Cmdb. That would be a different session altogether, because that would be a big exercise in terms of what all is required to configure Cmdb. The whole objective of this question is to understand the use case. Then why do we want to use Cmdb in the first place? If you do not use it, what are the problems? So this is also one way of answering questions. So for example, if you're not able to understand a question very clearly, that you're not able to answer, you're not able to think through immediately that what could be the answer of this question, why? So always think in terms of, if I eliminate that particular component for which I am being asked why about, I can think about those benefits. For example, if I remove Cmdb completely from this whole analysis, from this whole implementation, will I be able to do effective engine management? Will I be able to do effective problem management? Will I be able to do effective change management? No, I cannot do it, because it requires Cmdb, it requires those CIs to be selected in the forms. It requires us to send approvals for the changes for those particular impact items, whoever is upstream or downstream owner, depending on the configuration we've done. So the whole objective that Cmdb has to be there, and it has to be automated and accurate also. You cannot actually maintain a Cmdb manually to a large extent unless it is very, very small organization. That is fine. But if the organization is quite big, you need to do some kind of automations to ensure that it is all the time updated, because it plays a very important role in the entire ServiceNow implementation. Even this concept of CSDM we have talked about, that is also related to Cmdb, because it is a common service data framework, common service data model, which is actually based on the Cmdb classes only. It tells you the kind of relationships which these classes have together. How do you build the entire portfolio on those Cmdb tables, on other tables also beyond Cmdb. So you're not saying that CSDM only talks about Cmdb. There are multiple things as well. But overall understanding is that Cmdb is required to do the impact analysis for incidents, problems, changes. And that is one thing which brings everything all together in one place. So that is one of the most important underlying thing in ServiceNow, which kind of feeds that information to multiple sources. So that is why Cmdb is very, very important. Now, when I say, how do you find out which table is parent or child and which fields on the child table have been inherited from parent table? So there are two questions, two parts to it. One is that how do you find out which table is parent or child? Right. So for example, if you remember, we have seen multiple things. We have seen CI class manager, where we could immediately figure out which is a parent table, which is a child table, which child table is parent of, which child table is a part of which parent table. We have seen that already, right? Even under tables section. So let me go back to the instance and show you that quickly, right? If I'm talking about this portion, maybe. So if I were to search for CI class manager, right? From here, if you remember, we can see all the hierarchy, which table is a child of which table is a parent of which table, right? We have seen that hierarchy already. This from this section. There are two ways to do it. As I said, there is another way for tables and columns. We will look at that also in some time. Let this page get populated. It's sometimes a little slow. So yeah, so what I'm saying is it may not be necessary that you know all the ways of finding out the thing. Even if you know the most primitive way or one of the ways to find out those things, then also it is okay. So you don't need to be bogged down that, okay, do you know all the options to find out Cmdb? Which is good to know, of course, but it's not that it is like without you knowing every option to select it or to find it, you can't actually do the work. Because if you know even one single thing, which is fine. For example, Let me tell you Linux server. Let us see this Linux server. So when I search Linux server, this is what I can understand. Linux server is a child of server, which in itself is a child of computer, which in itself is a child of hardware, which in itself is a child of configuration item. So there are so many levels of hierarchy we're talking about here in terms of the child and parent class. Now somebody asks you, second question was that how do you find out which of them were fields on the parent table and which of the fields are from child table. This is where you find all derived errors. So all means all the fields or attributes on the Linux server table, out of which, for example, there are around 116 attributes. Let us see how many of them have been derived from parent table. From parent table, they have derived 115. Only one attribute is there which they have added to this Linux table, which is this kernel release. It was not a part of Windows table. It was not a part of server table. So this is the way by which you can find out that you can go to CI class manager, you search for that particular CI class type, go to its attributes and see how many of them have been derived, how many of them have been added. This was one way as we just talked about. Second way was that if I were to go here, if I just select tables, right? If I come here, let the page. So if I were to go, for example, Linux here, from here also I can find out the Linux server table is extending from server, which means server is its parent class and this is its child class, right? That is how you find it out. Now let's talk about the next question. This is difference between discovery and service mapping. So this was an interesting question which we discussed during the fundamentals, which we said, if I am doing horizontal discovery, which means I'm finding out attributes around a particular CI. For example, if I'm searching the Windows server, I'm finding out all the attributes of the server. What is the memory? What is the CPU? What is the disk space? So many things. What is the configuration of that? Which OS it is using? So all those things, all those attributes around a particular CI, which means the horizontal discovery part is handled in discovery. It also brings out relationships. For example, database hosted on a server, right? Something of that sort of relation. Any application hosted on a server, those relationships also do come via discovery. But when I talk about service mapping, this is where it is top-down discovery. When I say top-down discovery, which means I'm talking at an application interface level. So for example, there is a SAP application I have installed in my system, in my enterprise, and I want to find out this SAP application, which load balancers does it use, right? Which databases does it use? Which servers does it use? Which network does it use? All that top-down discovery is a part of service mapping. And this is equally important in today's era, especially because in the normal discovery, in the horizontal discovery, you do not get relationships between services and underlying infra components. You may get relationships between infra components, for example, which VM server is hosted on which ESX, right? You can get it. Which database is running on which server, you can get it because it is between the underlying components. When I tell you which SAP applications running on which servers, you will not be able to find out that from the normal discovery, from the horizontal discovery. And for that case, and if you remember, we talked about it that to make the Cmdb service aware, that's the whole objective, because if I am not able to find out the impact analysis in terms of which services would be impacted, then my job is not done completely, because that's the whole purpose of it. I should be able to understand which application services, which business services, which technical services would be impacted if there is a problem in that CI. So that kind of relationship from top to bottom, when I say top to bottom, I'm talking about business service to databases, business services to servers, application service to databases, load balances, all that top to bottom type of relationship, right from business service to servers, to databases, to network devices, to storage devices, all of those kind of relationships will come from service mapping. So the end-to-end connectivity from top to bottom will be coming from service mapping. So discovery is horizontal, service mapping is vertical, right? Now let's talk about the next question. This says difference between normal reporting and peer reporting. Now, we have seen that in ServiceNow, you have a lot of reporting capabilities. Normal reporting is there, which people generally use, which are very easy to use. You just need to select the right table. You just need to select the right filter. You just need to do some kind of group by type of attributes. You can just do some styling and publish a report. Very easy. but there are some limitations to normal reporting which are overcome by PA reporting. What are those limitations? So one of them is that any kind of calculative fields, for example, if you want to find out percentage MTTR increase, percentage SLA breaches, percent. So all those percentage types, all those scoring types of all those calculated metrics, first of all, they all come via PA reporting because you have to do those calculations under PA reporting. You can't do those kind of calculations in the normal report, first thing. Second thing, PA reporting is used for those cases where you want to capture the historical data set also, which means what was the state of this incident 5 days before. So if I do normal reporting today on that incident table, it will bring me the data of the latest status of that particular record, whatever it is open, in progress, or closed. Whereas in PA reporting, you can find out actually that its state changes from open to work in progress in 2 days. It changes from work in progress to resolved in 5 days, resolved to close in another 3 days. So those kind of transitions where you had different values in the history in the past for that particular record. So if you want to do any kind of historical reporting based on the value at that point of time, that is where you use PA reporting. And also during interactive analysis. For example, in the normal report, I cannot do an interactive analysis, like I cannot filter out records on a particular assignment group or a particular service or a particular customer. But in case of PA reporting, I can use those interactive dashboards and filters, which keep on changing if I change my filters on the top. And we have seen it all. I will not go much into detail in terms of how does it look like. We've seen that there are multiple filters, multiple interactive filters, which we can use, multiple interactive widgets we can use in PA reporting, which can dynamically auto-populate the entire dashboard, which is built out of PA reports, right? And of course, structurally, there are so many differences because normal reporting is too easy to do. You can do it in like flat 1 or 2 minutes if you're clear about the criteria. In PA reporting, you'll have to define multiple components like breakdowns, indicators, scores, so many things, schedule jobs, a lot of things you will do just to configure a PA report. So that is why it is not that easy to generate, to kind of produce, but it is quite value adding if you're clear in terms of the KPIs, in terms of the key performance indicators, in terms of a critical success rate. If you're clear about the goal, for example, somebody is telling you, I want SLA breach reducing from 90 to 70%, for example, in this quarter, that is first KPI. Second KPI would be, I want MTTR to be decreased by 20%, mean time to resolve incidents. Third thing would be, I want CSAT score to be raised from 5 to 8. Right? So these are some clearly defined objectives based on which you can create those calculative reports and dashboarding system, which can show you the consistent status on those kind of KPIs, and you can track the team's progress. Yeah, that is why you use PA reporting. Now let's talk about the next question. This says, when and where do you use a record producer? If you remember that, we talked about it at a service catalog level. So the whole concept of record producer is that you raise it via a service portal, for example, and it kind of creates any record in the task table in the backend. So for example, generally you use catalogs, you use service catalog, service portal for raising requests. That is a very normal phenomenon. That is where it is not called as a record producer. But then if I'm talking about a case where I have to raise an incident from the service portal, I am transferring that particular, so it is acting as a catalog for me from the front end, but in the back end, it is actually submitting an incident for me. This is where it generated a record in the task table, in this case, incident table, because we have talked about it, but incident, problem, change, all of those are actually task tables in the backend, right? So for such cases where you want to transform from one type of record to another type of record, you are generating it in the backend. For example, standard changes. You're raising it as a standard, you're raising it as a request from the request portal, but in the backend, it is generating a change actually. So those are the cases of record producers, where you create a record, generate a record automatically in a different task table from this, and when you submit it from the service catalog, right? Now let's understand the next question. It says, difference between data policy and UI policy. So we have seen both of them are client-side scripts, right? Not client scripts, they're client side scripts, right? In case of data policy, it could be server side also, because if you remember what happens in UI policy, you kind of, if you want to implement a behavior for mandatory, visible, show, hide, read only kind of behavior for certain fields on the form, you generally use UI policies. But that UI policy is only valid at a form level when you're entering data from the front end. If you want to put similar restrictions on the same data set, even from the back end, which means anybody is entering data from any third party source or any other source for that matter, those fields have to follow the same behavior, like mandatory, like read only, like visible, hidden, right? It should not be only eligible for front end side, it is also eligible from the back end. So in that case, in that scenario where you want those restrictions to be applied even from the back end, those are done using data policies, and anything which you want to just do on the form level at a UI level is done using UI policy. However, you have an option to convert a UI policy into a data policy or a data policy into a policy. Those options are there. There is this basic fundamental difference when do you use UI policy versus data policy. All right. Let's understand the next question. It says difference between data policy and, sorry, just talked about it. Difference between business rule and a client script. Now, both of them are platform scripts. We have talked about it. Even data policies and UI policies are platform scripting. However, client script is only to configure the client side behavior, which means if you're accessing it using browser and you want to do certain behaviors on that field for a particular form, this is where you use client script. Whereas in case of business rule, it is purely a server side scripting rather than a client side script, which means it is not changing things for you in the front side, in the front end. Everything is happening in the back end, which means, for example, I say that when a user gets inserted, when there's a new record inserted in the user table from some different sources, raise this catalog for that particular user. That is a kind of business tool because it is happening at the server side. It happens in the cases of, if you remember, we talked about it, if anything is inserted, modified, updated, deleted, those are the use cases where you use the business rules, not the client scripts. This is very important to understand. So what is happening with these kind of questions? First of all, there could be two ways to ask a question. For example, I can ask, tell me what is business rule. Second question, I can ask, tell me what is client script. But when I ask the difference between these two, right, then I challenge the understanding of the individual that, okay, you may know both the things, but then do you know the difference in the behavior of these two things? Do you know when should I use a business rule versus a client script? When should I use a data policy versus UI policy? This is where your understanding can also be tested rather than asking a straightforward question like, what is the data policy or what is the UI policy? That is why I always believe in asking questions which kind of which can help you think through. You can figure out a difference between those two things to enable yourself to understand things better and to answer things better. Right. Next one says difference between client script and UI policy. So we have talked about it already, that client script, both of them are client-side scripting, but here we're asking difference between client script and UI policy. So in case of UI policy, if you remember, we generally use UI policies for three cases: when we want to show or hide a field, when we want to make any field mandatory, or when we want to make any field read only. Those are the normal use cases for which you use UI policies. For client script, can be used for extensive scenarios where you might need to do some scripting to reach to cater to that scenario. It is little advanced in nature. Both of them, however, both of them work at the client side, which is okay, which is the similarity between them. But in terms of differences, client script is used for some exclusive scenarios where you need to do something, certain JavaScripting also in the back end. In UI policies, it is a very, very easy kind of configuration which anyone can do. So, and the use case is also different. I've told you the use case of UI policies are very clear, read only. So even ServiceNow recommends you that you should be using UI policies wherever applicable, because they don't want you to script things so much, right? Because the moment you start scripting things, which means you are actually customizing the system, you are deviating from the basic functionality of the system. There are certain cases where you need to deviate from those scenarios. You need to actually meet the business requirements. You have to do it, but ensure that you have already exhausted all those options which can be used via basic configuration rather than having a customization, rather than having a code change. It is always advisable to use those configurable options rather than customizable options. That is why for the basic cases which are easy to, which do not need any kind of scripting, you better use UI policies rather than client scripts. Right. So the next question is, how and when can you edit an ACL? So ACL, if you remember, was access control list. Generally, you should not be editing them unless and until it is required, right? Because if you remember, they're a little risky. It might break things for you also. So only in certain cases, wherever you think that I need to control this access via ACL and there is no other way out, there are no out-of-the-box rules in system which can help me achieve that, you should be doing ACL editing. And if you remember, how do you do it? When you do it by, first of all, impersonating yourself as a security admin, and then only you can edit ACL. Because without security admin role, you cannot actually edit any ACLs, and you should be doing it. You should be very careful. Ideally speaking, I would also always expect that system admin should not be doing it. It should be my developers under the supervision of an architect. There should be a proper governance mechanism to do ACL edits, because, as I said, it might break things for you as well. I've seen certain scenarios where just by changing one ACL, everybody had lost their access to ServiceNow. I mean, they were just able to read things and they're not able to even write anything on any records. So it is again risky. So always be extra cautious while doing it, and you should be using security admin. Now the next question says, structure of request management framework. So we have talked about multiple times when we studied the service portal catalogs, right? So if you remember, when I submit any request from the catalog, if I select any catalog from the service portal, and if I kind of order that particular item, then what happens? It generates a REQ, which is actually a request in the front side. So that is the first thing which I can see at the topmost level. So the highest level of hierarchy is REQ. Then you have requested item, RITM, under that particular REQ. Then you have tasks, SC tasks, under that particular RITM. And we've talked about it enough in our videos already. So this is the standard framework which happens in ServiceNow. You might have multiple requested items in one request. You can actually, when you add items to cart or when you use order guide, this is what generally happens, that you get only one request. Under that, there are so many bundled items which can be there. For every single item, you might have multiple tasks. So it is one to many kind of relationship, which means one request can have multiple RITMs, one RITM can have multiple tasks. Right? So this is how this framework is defined. You remember the example of onboarding request, right? So during onboarding, you might need access to a laptop, you might need access to a particular system, you might need access to software system, for example, right? So all of those have to be done by different teams, and you might have multiple different catalog items too, because those catalog items can also be ordered standalone rather than only bundled. So bundled is a case when you want to do it for a particular role. For example, a new joiner has to have these 10 things, or any developer has to have these 10 things. Any tester has to have these 10 things. Any business analyst has to have these 10 things. Those are the kind of cases which you generally use for defining the bundles and order guides, right? Right. What all things you need to define and configure the catalog. So you might not remember this answer immediately, because it is not that simple, easy one, right? But if you remember a screen back, and if I were to go here, and if I were to show you, for example, if I go to all, and if you remember where do we maintain catalog items? We maintain items, right? This is where your individual catalog is defined. So here, if you remember, we had so many things to configure. It is not that difficult, to be honest, but then you should be keeping in mind that, okay, first of all, what is the name of the item, right? Under which catalog category would it go? If you remember, we had a lot of categories in service portal. So we're deciding those categories, subcategories here, right? You can define the owner also. If you want to trigger any additional approval, you can define the owner of that item also. You can define the scope of the catalog, right? You can decide, okay, what is the automation level right now? Maybe there is no automation level. There is manual, semi-automated, fully automated, whatever you want to see, you can put it. Then you have to find out short description. You have to tell description, right? You have to talk about which workflow or flow designer I have to use, or which execution plan I have to use. Generally, people use work in the older versions. People used to use workflows. Now they are using flow designers. So this is where you use flow designer. If now flow designers and workflows are generally for automation purposes. Okay, you want to trigger a notification, you want to trigger some provisioning. All of that will be done using this flow and workflows. And then the basic picture, icon, pricing, any settings of the portal, for example, all the options, like, do you want to show it to add to cart option? Do you want to hide quantity? Do you want to hide delivery times? All those kind of stuff. So request methods, for example, order, request, submit, 3 options are there, right? We could have used any one of them. That is why there are so many things which are required for catalog item to be configured. It looks like quite easy, but still you can make it quite enriching if you were to take care of all these things. Yeah. Let's talk about the next question. This says, how do you find relationship between different tables in Cmdb? Right. So if I were to find out, okay, what is the relationship between a server and database? So again, you can always build your own relationship. There is no caveat to that. There is no question mark. But then if you remember, when we talked about CI class manager, we had a concept of suggested relationships. I'll just recall that quickly for you. We had this concept of CI class manager. And we said clearly that what are the suggested relationships in a table? That is one thing. Second thing, for example, if you switch on discovery in ServiceNow, then automatically everything will be in the suggested section. You don't need to configure those relationships manually. They'll come automatically. For example, let me go to the same part, Linux server. And let's see, this is where we had the concept of suggested relationships. There are 2 ways. This is one. The second way as well in the navigation menu, where we had this menu directly called as suggested relationships. And this is where why it is not coming. Okay. So remember, this is where we had suggested relationships. So we can find out that ServiceNow already recommends that Linux server should have these kind of relationships with different other classes in Cmdb. Right? This is how it works. These are the relationship rules. You can use any of the rules you want to, right? That is okay. I think here also we had this concept of suggested relationship, which talks about, so here it was a visualized view that, okay, it shows upstream, downstream, it shows how it looks like. Here they talk about at a theoretical level. For example, if I were to tell you, okay, Linux. So Linux class has so many relationships. I have done an enter. It is not. Okay. Maybe. Okay, it has done. Wait. So here you have something is wrong. Let me just see. For example, let's see circuit for now. So now if I were to see all the relationships of a circuit, I can say, dear, circuit is fed by UPS, circuit powers rack, circuit powers server, right? So if you remember, if it talks about parent, then this is the way you read it: circuit powers server, circuit powers rack. But this is a child relationship, which means circuit is fed by UPS. If you were to study in reverse order, you will read it like UPS feeds circuit. Rack is powered by circuit. Server is powered by circuit. So this is the difference between parent and child. So there are two ways by which you can find out relationships between different tables in Cmdb. Now this is, and there is third way also, if you remember. We talked about a class called CI relationships, which is you have Cmdb, rel, CI dot list. You see this? This has the relationships already. So many relationships. For example, Linux server, this instantiates this VM instance. Or if you want to read it in the reverse order, VM instance is instantiated by this Linux server, right? So there are so many relationships defined already in ServiceNow. These are demo examples, right? So you can define your own, but it is always recommended to use the ones which are there in suggested relationships of ServiceNow. Okay. There are those three ways which we can use to find out relationships. Now, if you want to see the data, then you should always come here. I mean, you want to see the existing data in ServiceNow to find out relationships, you should come only on CI relationships. If you want to just look at the format, template, content, you can see it under those two cases. So those two cases do not have the data inside it, whereas here you have the real data. So whatever relationship I want to create, it will be actually, there will be record in this table. Those are only the recommendations and suggestions. The real data comes in this particular table, and this is what it defines. For example, if I click on new, it asks the same question: what is the parent? What is the type of relationship? What is the child? Which child you're using here? And which port? Port is something optional. You may not use it. You may want to use it. You may not want to use it, which is fine. So here you have the actual records and actual data in system, right? Now, I mean, yeah, we'll talk about it in some time. Right. So next question is, where do you configure branding for any customer? What all things can you configure for branding? Again, very basic question. This is a very straightforward one, to be honest. There is no logic here, logical concept which has to be applied. We know for a matter of fact, for example, if I were to, give me a second. But if you remember, we have discussed about this branding already in a class 1 or 2. It was a very initial topic. There we saw under UI 16 properties, we had all of that, right? So, yep, let me just show you that quickly. I come here. So basic configuration UI 16, this is where we actually could do the branding part. So the question was, where do you do the branding? The branding is done in that UI 16 properties of system configuration UI 16. And second part is, what all things can you configure? You can configure the top banner, text, logo, color, time zone, date, time format. You can also talk about header, background color, banner text. So all of those things here, all those colors, styling, everything. There are so many things you can do here, right? So all of that you can do as a part of branding. It is a very small thing, and you can do it also via guided setup also. Yeah? Now, the next question is, what all do you need to consider while configuring knowledge management process? Now, this is a little advanced question, to be honest, not so basic. But then if you've worked on knowledge management process, you would know what I'm talking about here, right? So first of all, it requires, so for example, let us go back to system and just look at quickly. If I were to type knowledge here, right? Then first I kind of configure the knowledge base. Create. Right. So if you come here, you kind of create new article. So when you create a new article, that is where you have to understand knowledge management process, that you have to configure the knowledge base first. This is more of a logical container to keep your knowledge articles. This is what I'm talking about. So you have to understand knowledge base, you have to understand category. You should know about the end date, published date, right? You should also know about what type of article will that be. You should also know about the process. For example, if I were to show you all knowledge documents here, which, for example, let us see this all area here. you will need to configure the approval process. You will need to, and this process is, right? It says draft, then you have review, then you have scheduled for publish, then you have published, then you have pending retirement, then you have retired, and then you have outdated. So these are different stages under knowledge management process. So you'll be very clear in terms of what, when you say review, who all should be reviewing it? Should it have a technical level of reviewer? Should it have a governance level of approver also? Should it be sequential? Should it be parallel? Right? What kind of knowledge base I'm going to use? Right? You publish. Is there a default expiry date? Like after every year, the article gets renewed. Somebody has to review it again. And then you should understand when should you retire it as well. So all of those process flows in terms of approvals, in terms of that entire out of the box process, you should know what all things should be done. Apart from that, if, for example, if I were to show you maybe one article, and then if you see this, right, it has the knowledge base in category. We talked about it already. Now here, if you go a little down, then you can also see there are things like right. So there are some things like feedback. So those things generally get captured automatically if you kind of use that portal to give feedback. But then you can use related articles and related retro items also for that particular purpose, and even the versions and approvals. All of that you can take care of. Right. So this is all need for knowledge management process. Yeah. Now the next one. How many types of visual task boards do we have? What are the differences among them? So this question, I think we have done multiple times. We have also seen it as a part of our theoretical exercise, if you remember. We have seen that there are three. One is your free form, then a flexible, then a guided, right? And we know the difference. The free form is just, you just drag and drop anything under any banner, and it does not reflect the actual records, but it can show you things quickly, and you don't need a lot of configuration to set up a free form board. If you talk about guided board, this is where you kind of align them under some proper categories, right? Based on some choice fields and reference fields. And then you have the flexible board, which is like where you can update things right from the front end itself. You can just drag and drop things and it will be updating things in the back end. There are those three different kinds of visual task boards we have. Okay. Next one. So what are the different types of ServiceNow user interfaces? We have seen it again. When do we use what, right? So first of all, you have UI 6, you have that native UI, which is the one which we always use as a support team member, as a manager. So this is the one which we use generally, which is your native UI. Then you use ServiceNow portal for the end users. So the question is asking you, when do we use what? So we use portal for end users to allow them to raise requests or incidents or search knowledge or see their favorites, widgets, whatever they want to see. Then you have mobile apps. You have three mobile apps. One is your now onboarding mobile app. One is your now mobile. Then your now agent mobile, right? And we know the functions of all three. So onboarding is primarily used for onboarding app. Now mobile is used by end users, the latest version of ServiceNow mobile app. And then now agent is used by agents to solve the problems, to resolve the tickets. You can also approve things, you can request things, you can raise an incident, you can track your things there. So all of that can happen in those apps. Now, as a part of San Diego, if you remember, we talked about next generation user interface. That is also there, which is released only in UI 6. This is what I'm talking about. So this, you're all right here. If you go to this home page, this is where you see the entire thing, right? All of this is actually your now mobile next generation portal, right? You can change from anything, you can go favorite history workspaces, you can search among a lot of things. So all of that is a part of your next generation interface. So there are these different interfaces of ServiceNow which we use. Now, what kind of architecture does ServiceNow have? So if you remember, we talked about in the very first class, it is first of all APaaS, application platform as a service. Then it is a multi-tenant architecture. You have things, so you have, let's open that. I think we had that discussion earlier. Let's show you the PPT once again so that you can refresh that part. Discussion around it. So in case of, for example, domain separation, you have an option that you host one single instance, but you open it for multiple customers and all of them will be domain separated. So you are kind of hosting multi-tenants in one single environment. customer A, people from customer A side will not have access to data from customer B side, right? That is how it works. So these are your architectural things from ServiceNow. If you remember, this is the one I was talking about, multi-instance architecture. One instance can talk to second instance also here, and every instance has their own set of application middleware, OS, VM, similarly here, and they can also talk to each other. So multi-instance is a new word here in this case of ServiceNow, right? And we talked about domain separation also, that we can have global domain where you have data processes, admin tasks, and you can separate them further by domain, different domains. So users from this domain will not have access to this domain. This is what you do generally as a part of application platform as a service. And this is latest technology, so it is quite scalable in nature, high availability, high performance environment. So anything goes down, you always have a backup. You can always take care of that part also, right? So it is architecturally very strong, completely new generation technologies. So availability and performance, capacity, security, all of that is of quite high standards. They use the high standard in security protocols also, right? So just a minute.